Hello and welcome to our webinar about how to fix festering issues that stifle agency growth. My name is Fred Valles. I'm one of the co-founders here at Optmyzr, and we like to do webinars that teach our customers how to run better agencies, how to run better PPC accounts, how to be better at AdWords. So I'm super excited today that we have Jeff Allen, president of Hanapin Marketing. It's an agency that's very successful. And he's agreed to share with us a little bit about what he's been doing over the past couple of years to make that agency as successful as it is today. So I run into Jeff periodically at conferences, specifically HeroConf. And it's always really great to talk with someone else who's a PPC expert, who's been successful at building a great agency. And I'm really excited that he's willing to share some of those insights with all of us today. So I know a lot of Optmyzr customers have agencies, they might be consultants. And Optmyzr, by the way, for those of you who are not using it yet, is a PPC management tool. So we help with reporting, optimizations, data insights. But yeah, so Jeff is really willing to share this information. He also does sessions at HeroConf, and for him to get on a session here today where we don't have to pay anything to learn a little bit about how we can run better PPC agencies, I think is super awesome. So with that, I'd like to welcome Jeff, and I'll also ask everyone who's with us today to answer a question. So how big is your agency? Or perhaps you don't work at an agency, but you're thinking about starting one. So Jeff, welcome. Tell us a bit about yourself and about Hanapin.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Fred, first of all, and for all the nice things you said about me. I'll try to make most of them true. So Hanapin, I've been here for about 7 years now. When I started, we were 13 people. Now we're about 70, somewhere in there. So we've seen a lot of growth, bunch of Inc. 5000 awards and all that kind of good stuff that comes with that. But really had a lot of success going up market with our client base from more and more unheard of clients to larger and larger brand name clients over the last couple of years.
Nice. And so here I'll share the results of the poll. So most people have actually relatively good size agencies between 6 and 20 people, and then a couple of consultants on the call as well. So hopefully this content will be very relevant for everyone. So with that, I'm about to get out of the way here, but I do want to say we are recording this webinar, so you'll get a copy of that later today or tomorrow. We are live, so if you have any questions for Jeff or myself, anything to do with agency, anything to do with AdWords, please do ask it in the Q&A box. I also have my colleague Esperanza from Optmyzr helping monitor that, so we'll do our best to answer everything that comes in. And then most of the questions I'd like to save for the end. That's when Jeff and I will have a conversation and talk a bit about what you were all asking. But with that, Jeff, the floor is yours. I'll hide these results, and we should be able to see your screen.
Great. Appreciate it, Fred. And of course, as we're going through this, if you have anything that I say and you disagree with, feel free to keep it to yourself. And if there's anything you agree with, you think I'm really smart, feel free to jump in and share it.
Right.
So I'm not going to spend really any time talking about us. I already mentioned a little bit about it. But just to give a little bit of context to the conference, as Fred said, we do one in the US and one in London each year. And then we, on the third day, do a half-day agency growth workshop that really we started 4 or 5 years ago. And we started doing it because we believe a rising tide lifts all boats. And so our goal is really to increase, through the conference and the agency growth side, increase the reputation and the quality of service our industry provides clients, so that we spend a lot less time in pitches trying to explain what we do and the value of it, and a lot more time talking about our strategy and our creativity. So I'll talk a little bit more about that all at the end. So we're going to get into festering issues. And to me, the festering issues these are the things that we faced, but also we hear very commonly faced by other agencies. And I stay in contact with a handful of agency folks at the ones that we go up and pitch against quite frequently. And it's interesting how often we share similar issues. Before I get to the festering ones, the ones I think you can do a lot about, I'm going to talk a little bit about the ones that you can't do a lot about, the core issues to the industry in general. And talk a little bit about this Gallup report. There's a URL at the bottom. It's a really ugly URL. If you just search Gallup B2B Report 2016. You'll be able to find it a lot easier than probably trying to screen grab that long URL. But I'm going to talk about a couple of the stats from it that are pretty alarming. The first one here is the percentage of B2B customers who are at risk, and the answer from Gallup is 71%. And what this means is 71% of the B2B companies out of thousands and thousands that Gallup surveyed, 71% said they don't have a strong relationship with their agency. They're not attached to their service provider in any way, really kind of meaning emotionally, psychologically, there's nothing keeping them there. So it's results, results, results. And this creates a lot of issues for a lot of reasons. One, if the whole organization isn't committed to the agency and the one person you might have that good relationship with changes companies, that could be painful and result in churn. And also mean one small misstep, one small mistake, or even one cold email the client gets could cause some client churn as well. So 71% of customers are at risk is pretty alarming. And some of the core issues, and I always like to say agency business is a terrible business to be in. I've been doing it for 20 years now, and for some reason I'm a glutton for punishment. But it's a terrible business to be in because there's over 10,000 agencies. Actually got up to 14,000 once through a bunch of kind of cross-referencing. But it was my own handiwork. But if you look at 4A or some of those big advertising agency associations, they'll tell you there's about 10,000 plus agencies in the US that do digital, along with maybe other services. And there are only about 2,000, based on our estimations, it's really 2 to 4, advertisers that spend 7 figures per year. So 100K, really 80K or more a month in paid search and PPC. And not all those 10,000 are trying to get that same 2,000, but a lot of them are. And it's usually kind of the ones everyone's trying to go up market to serve. And if you slice that further, we have a couple dozen clients that would fit that 7 figures per year. And there's probably another 50 or so agencies that have a couple dozen as well. So if you slice it down to that, you probably really have 9,950 agencies that are competing for about 1,000 different advertisers spending 7 figures a year. So it is a tough, hyper-competitive space. And within that, depending on how you structure your agency, 60% or more of your revenue is typically going to go straight to employees. It's going to be paying for people to actually service these accounts. And that makes it tough. It makes it tough to be nimble, makes it tough to plan very far ahead, makes it tough to be able to have the right expertise on your account for whatever, or on your team for whatever the next account you might sign is. So these constraints, hyper competitive, lots of agencies out there, very few really great big spending advertisers that everyone's chasing after, and a lot of resources going into employees is kind of the core issues that make agencies a tough business. And before I jump to the festering issues, just my keyed in belief on how to deal with that is to focus on distinction versus differentiation. Now, I'm using Coca-Cola as an example here, which is B2C, but I'll talk about why in just a second. But the importance of distinction versus differentiation is distinction is being memorable, using memorable brand assets and using them consistently, being top of mind for the people who are searching for your services and kind of pulling people into RFPs and going to go through that process, versus differentiation, because out of 10,000 agencies, you better bet a lot of those have pretty similar services. I've been frustrated myself at times when I've talked to other agencies, talked about the problems we're facing with maybe close rates, or maybe sales opportunities are down, or maybe they're up, and we're trying to figure out why. And it's interesting how often we're riding the exact same wave. And as hard as we try to buck trends, to stand out and all that, a lot of times we line up, even thinking creatively, more in alignment than not. And there's this great book, and in the end I'll actually talk about a couple books, but there's this great book called How Brands Grow. And it talks about how the importance of distinction over differentiation in industries that are hyper competitive without a ton of differentiation. Think Coke versus Pepsi. And the interesting study is 70% of Coke drinkers actually will drink Pepsi from time to time. It's not they're so loyal to the brand that they never switch. But the vast majority of people, I forget what it is, but it's somewhere around 75%. The vast majority of people who don't drink soda very often, when they do, 100% of the time drink a Coke. And that's where they gain their market share. It's not these loyalists. It's they've done such a good job being distinct and memorable and being the thing you think of when you think of wanting a drink, that they capture all that extra market, all that incremental market that doesn't shop very often. So when you think about B2B buyers, they don't shop very often, hopefully, if they're good B2B buyers. They make their decision every couple of years when they want to switch agencies, hopefully even longer. And so they're really going to start looking at who's top of mind. What are the agency I've heard of? Who do I know? Who am I going to give all this money to and trust them that they're going to do a really good job of it? And furthermore, 50% of folks today making B2B decisions, or at least doing the research on them, are between 18 to 34. And these folks think a lot more like consumers than they do like business decision makers. They think a lot more about who's distinct, who's doing something cool, who's memorable, who have I seen out there in the world, and that I want to kind of copy some of their work, and how do I find the agency that's working with them. So that's why I say the core issue, the hyper-competitive space that we're all in, or at least most of the folks on the webinar today are in, requires focus on distinction. How do you make your agency distinct through your focus, through your approach, through your marketing that's super consistent, in order to be able to pull new business in and in order to grow it. All right, so let's jump to the whole point of this whole thing, the festering issues. And there's a lot of festering issues within agencies, but the four that I'm going to tackle today are, and these probably will sound familiar, clients quitting, or at least causing a lot of stress on your team because your team, your account managers, your analysts, whatever you call them, aren't being strategic. They're not being proactive. They're not providing recommendations. Now, I've done this for 20 years. For the first 10 years or so of that, anytime this came up, I would say, you're crazy. PPC is the strategic decision. You've decided to do this channel as part of your marketing strategy. What do you mean we're not being strategic? It's a very tactical channel. And so, of course, we're talking a lot about bids, ads, and keywords and that kind of thing. But we'll talk about nowadays how that's the expectation is, no, we want agencies that really thought through my business and what the future looks like and how to impact that. Another thing that I hear often is, once there's an issue on an account, you never recover. Around here, we'll say when a client quits, they didn't quit today, they quit 3 months ago, something happened. And it's interesting how often, if a client does churn, the question is, what happened? What happened last week? What happened in the last month? And how often I hear other agency folks not going back far enough and say what happened 2 months ago or 3 months ago. So we're going to talk about how to recover from incidents in this webinar. Employee turnover greater than 20%, which leads to account turnover greater than 20%. So that's kind of a vicious cycle of an employee leaves, a key account leaves because they really love that employee. Another employee leaves because they start worrying that key account left and wasn't mean for them, and then you lose another account, that kind of cycle. So we'll talk about employee retention a bit. And then I've grown, or you've grown, by taking on any client that will sign. You have to in the early days. You have to say yes. You have to say yes to everything, and then later find a way to figure it out. I think the founder of LinkedIn said, push an airplane off the cliff and build the wings on the way down. So you have to do that. But now that you're growing, I saw a lot of folks that up to 20 employees, which is a good growing agency. After that point, you have to start making some decisions. What clients maybe don't make sense for us anymore. So I'm going to talk about how we proactively look at our client portfolio and make those decisions. So jumping straight in, the first one, being strategic. What I find more times than not is when a client says you're not being strategic, or a manager pushes their team to be more strategic, the starting point is there's no good definition of what that even means. It means a million things to a million different people. So it may mean, like I said, in my early days, I would say being strategic means even doing PPC to start with. That's being strategic. That's the channel you chose to do. But over time, I've kind of refined it down to what I think is a pretty simple, straightforward explanation of it, and helps frame thinking on how to deliver strategy and how to talk about it. And that is identifying and planning for opportunities and threats to maximize future performance. That's it. Understanding what's going to happen in the future, having some kind of point of view on how that's going to impact a particular client, a particular account, and then doing something about it. That's all clients want. They don't have the time to say all that, nor do they necessarily know, how to put words to all of that, but that's what they want. Meanwhile, what they have is a account manager that's talking about, oh, CPCs went up 10%, so we changed the bids, or we're now trying, Optmyzr's bid algorithm. We're going to see what that looks like compared to what we'd previously been doing, which I certainly would suggest using their tools. Or this keyword that we added, this negative that seems interesting, or some ad tests we're going to run. Sometimes we think we're being strategic just talking about these ad tests we're going to run and how great it's going to be someday. But the problem is, maybe to the client, that's not a threat to them. Maybe their CTR is fine and volume's fine, and they updated their ad copy a month or two ago. And maybe it's something else that's on their mind that we need to be able to talk to them about. So really pushing in and instilling largely in the client-facing folks on your team, always be thinking, always identify, always plan for opportunities that are threats to maximize future performance. And if you talk about that stuff a lot, sometimes our very analytical people in our industry have a hard time with it, because sometimes it goes nowhere. You talk about voice search for 30 minutes and realize it's something you don't have to worry about right now. But eventually you'll have to. So one of my tips for doing this is called Mentalizing. This graphic is from Jeffrey Schwartz, Josie Thompson, and Art Kleiner from the Wise Advocate Enterprises. And it just is an interesting illustration for the way people think habitually compared to a strategic way of thinking. And both of these actually become habits. It's the way the brain works. The more you exercise these muscles, the more often you are to think one path over the other. Now, I'm going to spend a lot of time on this, but basically I break the thinking process down into a low road and a high road. And the low road is concerned with what will make people happy today, what will make me happy, what will make the client happy, and doing some short-term thing to make that happen. The high road is concerned with thinking and understanding what others are thinking about and what they're going to do next, so you can think about long-term value creation. And oftentimes that means in this moment, I'm going to have a much harder conversation than I want to have. It'd make me more happy to not have a hard conversation. Or I'm going to push off a project longer because I think that it will actually be more successful if we wait, or whatever it may be, if we think this way. So if you're on the high road, you're doing more like, what are others thinking? What are they going to do? And then you take action and do what's needed most. And the more often you do that, the more strategic you'll become, and the more you'll think about the future. On the other side, you think a lot about, who am I? What do I want? What do other people want? And how do I do what feels right? And if you do that a lot, then naturally you'll do that a lot, and you'll focus a lot more on short-term things that don't necessarily move the needle in the long run. One of the things that I talk to people endlessly about here at Hanapin is what I call 4-step strategic updates. So when I first started here, I actually didn't start as president of Hanapin. I started as an account manager 6 or 7 years ago. And when I started, we had this thing called FAM, Friday afternoon meeting, and we went through every single one of our accounts during that, account manager by account manager. So you'd walk in the room, and the bosses would ask you questions like, how are the account, what's the plan, what's CPCs, what's CPAs, all that kind of good stuff. And what I found is people really dreaded this meeting, and oftentimes would spend a half hour in it, and sometimes come out a little red in the face and aggravated. And once I got into my own accounts and started attending FAM myself, I would go in and be out in 2 minutes, literally 2 minutes. And I'd kind of scratch my head, what's going on? Everyone else seems to really struggle with this. Do they not like talking to me very much? And eventually, after 6 months or so, I started working on one of our bigger accounts that had a bigger account team. And so we would go in as an entire team. And immediately that first FAM, when the whole team was in there, I saw what was happening. And what I was doing differently with these 4-step updates versus what other folks were doing was just kind of going through a list of, well, here's performance, and then stopping and waiting for the next question. And then saying, well, here's the plan for next week, and then stop and wait for the next question. And so the bosses asked a lot of follow-up questions, as you can imagine, really started drilling down into the data based on what they thought was important, and kind of ran things off track. I walked in and I said, here's what happened in the last week. Here's what we specifically did based on what happened. here's what the results were, and here's what we're going to do next. So for example, it might say, last week we updated all of our ad copy, CTR is looking really strong, and we're above performance goals. Based on all of that, we decided to do some research for some keyword expansion because we didn't need to do any account optimizations because that was going really well. We uploaded 100 new keywords and got a million new conversions, whatever it really was. And so next, we're going to focus on bid optimizations for those keywords. And when you give an update in this 4-step way, you explain in detail your thinking and what you've already done and what the results were from it. It makes it a much more strategic feeling update, and you get far, far fewer follow-up questions, which made it so, of course, I couldn't answer some of the follow-up questions that they were asking the other folks. It's not like I had this perfect memory and can remember them all. But I didn't get pulled into those conversations, whereas the other people did. And once it was kind of exposed, you didn't know, built some doubt, and on and on and on. So 4-step strategic updates are really, really important to push your team on. Knowing the client's business is really important. There's kind of varying degrees that folks think you need to do this. I think in general, you need to speak the client's language, whatever that is. So if they talk about CPLs or cost per transaction or cost per booking or CPA or CPCs, whatever that metric is they talk about, that's the word you need to use. They're not interchangeable to that client, even though to you it may seem. Same for average order value or lifetime value or even ad spend per sales ratio. If that's the language they use internally, that's the language you need to use. What about their process once they generate a lead? If they say for an education client, it's a lead to an app to an enroll to a start, well, you need to understand each of those stages and make sure you're talking about them appropriately. And it seems obvious, but I've seen whole conversations get derailed by someone calling something a start instead of an enrollment. I've seen hour-long conversations about how those things are different and how important it is that those things are treated differently that derailed an entire meeting. So it's really, really important. And you should know some key stats. Over here, I didn't log in, so there's still some locks on it, but this is the for-profit education industry, $18 billion industry with 1,200 players. If you do the math, that's only $13 million in revenue per player. Again, a hyper-competitive space, super fragmented, important to know. So speaking the client's language, understanding their business is going to help you be perceived more strategically. All right, so let's move on to resolving issues. I talked earlier about how important it is to resolve an issue because it feels like once there is an issue, you never get past it. This is from that same Gallup survey. 60% of B2B customers believe their problems were not resolved after they had them. 60%. And I bet if you ask their account managers, the same 100 account managers as you surveyed the 100 businesses, I bet 60% would say they were resolved. In fact, maybe like 70 or 80%. But if you dug into it a little bit, what I find is often what the account manager says is, well, the client never brought it up again, so it must be resolved. That's not quite the same thing. In fact, really interestingly, how issues are resolved actually have a much greater impact on the client than the actual resolution that's reached. So these stats here, the first one is customer engagement is more dependent on problem handling than problem resolution. And what this is saying is 54% of people who are very satisfied with problem handling are engaged clients. These are the good clients you want to keep. But only 27% say they're very satisfied with the actual resolution. So it is twice as important for how you handle the problem to whether or not those clients are engaged with you or not than the actual resolution you reach. Also interesting, although less stark, is 54% of folks that had a problem and very satisfied with the handling of that problem were fully engaged, but no problem at all reported, there was no issues, is only 50%. So it's not a huge gap, but also said, hey, there may be something to this. If there is a problem and it's handled very well, that may be better long-term than not even having a problem at all, which is a little counterintuitive. So how do we handle problems effectively? So I'm going to talk a little bit about our process for doing it, but first I want to go over Gallup's advice since I'm stealing some of their survey data for this. I figured it was only fair to give them credit. So when you're handling a problem, things that matter, the first is focus on what matters most, and what matters most to the client. maybe you overspent on the account, but they have plenty of money. They're not worried about the actual money they overspent. They're worried about QA. Or maybe they're a highly regulated industry and they say, hey, if you can't manage your budget right, we have concerns that are you managing our ad copy right that's not going to get us in trouble or something like that. So uncovering the client what matters most is important. Treating customers like partners. So if you're thinking about the client long term, what would you do for a long-term fix? Not just how do I get this off of my plate. Working with multiple people on the client side is very important. You can't just work with one point of contact, try to come up with a resolution, and then hope that they're able to sell that internally. You should have multiple people on your side, the agency side, working with multiple people on the client side to come to a resolution. Senior leadership should be involved on the agency side. Clients expect that if something goes wrong, that some senior level member of the team is at least going to step in and acknowledge that it's an issue and talk about the solution. And then it's important that the agency has a people strategy. By people strategy, it means who's in what role and what are they actually authorized to do. The most frustrating thing is to have a problem, talk to your contact about it. Your contact can't make any decision about it, but they won't let you talk to anyone else that does. And so it becomes this daisy chain of communication, and you never really feel like you're able to get to the core of it with the people who can make the decision. So you have to understand up front when there is an issue and it's going to happen, and it is eventually going to happen for everyone, that you have some understanding of who has authority and whatnot to resolve it. Which brings us to our process. This is our process for when there's an issue with an account. We call our process client champions. And for every time there's an issue, I'll just walk through this process. We assign a champion that same day. And we decide that champion, hopefully they raise their hand. We hear an issue and the person with the best relationship at the highest level of the org chart that we're working with, the client's org chart, raises their hand and says, I'll lead this. I'll be the champion on this. Sometimes they don't raise their hand and we have to figure it out. But we want to assign it the same day, right away, as quickly as possible, someone say, I'm going to own this. And that's a really important aspect of this. We find a lot of times no one really owns the resolution at the highest level. At least for us, years and years ago, that's how it used to be. So we put this in place. The next thing is acknowledging the issue within 24 hours. Hey, there was this issue. We acknowledge it. We're working on it. Oftentimes for us, that happens very quickly, within an hour or two. But we put a 24-hour because for traveling and things like that, it might extend to that point. This champion then gathers resources and approval. So if it's me that's a champion on an account, I don't have to worry about approval. I can make the decisions. But if it's someone else, they may say, hey, what's my parameters here for when I can make a decision? If it's adding resources, or if it's something to change about their contract, or if we are talking about some kind of monetary compensation or something like that. What are my bounds here that I can work within? Then the champion's going to explain the plan that we put together, all within 72 hours. If a plan takes longer than 2 weeks, for some reason it's an ongoing thing we're going to have to work through. They schedule weekly meetings with the client to make sure we're updating them on progress and getting feedback on how we're doing. And then an important thing that we used to miss that's made a world of difference is 1 week after we've completed the plan, 1 week after we've resolved the issue, we follow up with the client, have a phone call, not just an email, and ensure it's fully resolved. We ask a bunch of questions to figure out, truly, is this moved past, completely resolved, everyone feels great about how it was handled before moving on. And a lot of times we find out no. It's usually a very minor thing of this needs to be tweaked, or we didn't think about this, how are we going to do that later on, that kind of thing. We usually uncover some more information. So that's how to resolve issues with clients. Again, making sure you have a formal process to really, really work through it and have someone who owns it until completion. So now I'm going to talk about employee performance management, and this is within the context of if you have employee churn greater than 20%, or you have 1 or 2 key employees you're worried about losing. This is kind of our process that over the last 3 years, I think we've gone from 80% retention to, I think it was 85% retention. And last year we were actually 95% employee retention. And a lot of it hinges on these quarterly check-ins we do with our clients. So we do semi-annual performance reviews. I'm not going to go a ton into those. But those work similar to what you would expect from a normal performance review. You talk about how you're hitting goals, how are you working with your teammates, are you doing things on time? We also go through our company values, how are you doing with those? But I'll talk about two things that we do that are somewhat unique, which is our stay interviews and our goal paths. And since adding those to our policy or our process, that's when we've seen a really good increase in employee retention. So stay interviews is kind of exactly what we say. Like a lot of times when people quit, you do an exit interview. They put a notice, you sit down, you get a lot of honesty from them. I was frustrated about this, and I didn't see career opportunities, and I wanted to do things this way, and no one would let me. Things that a lot of times were fixable if you knew they were an issue going into it. So we now do stay interviews. Hey, we want you to stay. So before we get to a point that we're doing an exit interview, let's talk about all this stuff. And we have questions that we can ask, but it's really more of an open conversation. And a lot of times it goes a lot of different ways. But here are some common questions we ask. So flat out, why do you come to work every day? And on the other side, what makes you roll your eyes? What's the stuff we need to keep feeding you that's making you fulfilled and making work meaningful for you? But also, what's driving you crazy and likely going to be the reason you quit? How do you know if you've had a great day? And then asking that question pulls out a lot of insight on how they measure their impact and how they, when they go home at the end of the day, really reflect on the work they did. What talents and skills do you have that we haven't made use of? This helps us make sure we're unlocking our potential on our team and pulling out skills that maybe we just don't realize our teammates have. And how do you like to be recognized? So, do you like to be public? Does like to be winning awards? Does like to be in email? We have kind of 70 employees in 70 different ways that folks like to be recognized for good hard work. But asking these questions, asking them up front, really helps managers understand how to best manage their employees. And for us, probably 10 to 20% of the time, we uncover really significant issues that employees flat out tell us, this would have led me to leaving if we don't fix. And they're almost always really easy to fix, but we never would have without actually asking the question. So that's stay interviews. This is our career path doc, our goal pathing doc. So we do this once a year. There's a kind of a back end to this where they fill out all this information, but this is the front end, what it looks like after they're done. This is mostly fictitious. I think I am better at leadership than a 2, but I felt like it would be too conceited to give myself that. What this helps people do is visualize where they're going and what they need to work on to get there. And they take an employee takes a first stab at this, and then through a meeting with their manager, they talk through it and make sure there's really good alignment and an action plan for how to improve in the areas they need to improve. So at the top, we have a map out. Hey, where are you at now? Where do you want to be in 1 to 3 years? Where do you want to be in 3 to 5 years? And where do you want to be beyond that? We have a fairly structured organization, so job titles are fairly consistent. People can kind of do this on their own. But if there's not, you can still talk about it conceptually. You can say, well, today I'm an account manager. Eventually, I want to work on larger accounts. So they can just put larger accounts in that next step, and it would at least force the conversation around what that path looks like and what it's going to take to get there. And then below that, we do a SWOT analysis, which is just where they need to be looking at in terms of things that they should be pushing harder on. If it's a strength of theirs, they should be finding opportunities to use them. If there's weaknesses of theirs, they should talk about, is there a plan to address those, or are they okay? If they don't need to improve in that area, is it, yes, a weakness, but not one that's actually impacting them? And on the right, it's all that broken down into 1 to 5, 0 to 5 scale. Employees rank themselves on this, and so it's their ranking. And they also decide what that scale looks like in terms of presentation skills, for example. I said, I only need to be at a 4. I don't need to be at a 5 ever. Now, I gave myself a 1, so I have a long way to go until I get to even where I want to be. But I'm kind of admitting maybe I don't need to be a 5. Finance was another one. We have a CFO. We have 2 people in accounting. We have the folks that used to run our books when we were really small are still around. We have a lot of depth and skill in our finance department. So I probably don't ever need to be a 5. I need to be a 4. And so it provides that. And again, there's a conversation about it. Is that true? Is that accurate? That forces a lot of alignment, again, long before it ever becomes an issue with an employee leaving or something like that. And then gives kind of an action plan to follow up on over the next year to make sure they put some effort into these different things. And one of the things, though, over the last couple of years, we've uncovered that really makes an impact for us is what's called deep fun. So sure, we have a ping pong table, we have picnics, we have, you know, all kinds of time off, all that kind of good stuff. But all that kind of falls flat eventually. You either have to just keep adding to it. You have to add another ping pong table, or you have to add a billiards table or something like that. Or you have to keep adding PTO or go unlimited PTO. And the reason is that's all surface stuff. And deep fun is about really carving out space for employees to work and improve on fundamental systems as a group. So how do they come together and work on workflow issues? How do they tackle new business development? How do they tackle a PTO app if people don't like how they request paid time off or something like that? Coming together as a group and actually working on those big tricky problems that usually it's only the executive level of a company working on, and having a system for people to be able to do that. Actually, companies that do that have 4 times the profit as companies that don't, and twice the revenue. They make more money and they make a lot more profit if they actually enable their employees to work on these tough things and create really cool solutions. So I encourage the team to empower folks. We have a very decentralized decision-making authority here. We're a fairly flat organization, all with this. We want our employees working on really important Hanapin problems and putting solutions together so that they own them. And then last here, I'm going to talk about our client portfolio reviews. So this is where I talked about you just kind of sign every business you can at the early days, and eventually you look at your client roster, your portfolio, and you say, maybe I would like this to look a little different. I'm not sure if we should change our market, go up market. Maybe up market's not for us, and we should focus on smaller accounts. So every quarter, we do a client portfolio review, and we pull together, it's about 10 people. We pull together someone in accounting, a couple people in sales, all of our kind of account directors, and we talk through every single one of our clients. And we talk through these 6 questions, and then the top one is the one I'm going to talk the most about. So we talk about where are they at in their life cycle. I'll go into that later. Are we growing their business? Clients aren't with you to be stagnant. They're not with you just to hit goals. They're there to grow. So we ask that question. Is the client profitable? So even if they're growing, are they actually making profit? And are they making more profit today than when they hired us? Is the client happy? We do surveys every quarter with our clients. We do a net promoter score. So we look at that rating for the specific client, and have they indicated to us that they're actually happy, not just doing well as a business? Do we have a strong relationship? Which to us means, do we have multiple people on our side who have relationships with multiple people on their side? And if we have that, we feel like we have a strong relationship. If we only have one person on our side that has really good relationships with 5 people on their side, that's not good. Or if we have 5 people on our side with only 1 relationship on their side, that's not good. We're looking for that kind of zipper effect of multiple people on multiple sides, being able to work together and work through tricky situations. And then are we maximizing new opportunities for the client? Have we found the new channels they need to be moving into? Are we finding wins with CRO? All those kinds of things. For us, it's somewhat selfish. We'll make more money if we're maximizing all those opportunities. But again, clients, if they're not growing and they're not maximizing those new opportunities, they're not going to see us as strategic. So those are the questions we go through. But the first one here, what's the client in the life cycle, is kind of a thing in the last year or two we've really started to focus on and understanding. So on the right, I have a 2x2 grid. And this is basically showing where clients would fall in each of these different things. On the horizontal axis, you have the cost to serve that customer. For us, we look at our hourly rate, just as an hourly rate compared to goal, scale of 1 to 10. 10 is the client's really high hourly rate. 1 is really bad hourly rate. Where did that client fall on it? And the vertical axis is how much are we charging? And again, it's just a scale of 1 to 10. For every particular client, we rate how much we're charging them compared to what we think, a little bit indexed against our own client list, so compared to our client profile, where do they fall on that? And then also out external to us. Do we think, we're undercharging them compared to what someone else would charge, or maybe overcharging them compared to what someone else is charging them? You plot those out, so the access points would be a 5 for cost to serve and 5 for what we're charging them. And if they end up in the top right, those are your partners. You're charging them a whole bunch, but you're also spending a whole bunch of time on those accounts, hopefully working on really unique, interesting problems, creating a ton of value for them. If you're not spending a ton of time, but still charging a whole bunch, this calls them your most valuable customers because sure, you're making a bunch of money on them, but in reality, those are your cash cows. Those are clients that are paying you a ton of money and eventually are going to realize it and move to they're going to negotiate a contract or fire you and move to the bottom left, which is commodity buyers. You're not spending a ton of time on them, but you're also not charging them a ton of money. Very transactional. That's not a bad thing. If everyone's aligned in that and everyone agrees this is a transactional relationship, clients, there's alignment here at least. Clients and agencies can be really happy in this space. But if you're spending a ton of time on the clients, but not charging a lot, you move to that right, those are underperformance. You're probably losing money on those accounts and you have to decide what to do. Now, the client's life cycle, if uninhibited, if you don't do anything to proactively push or move clients into one of these buckets, they're all going to follow the same life cycle. Hopefully you do a good job of sales and you sign them in the top right. You get a fair price for the amount of work that you're going to have to do to make that client happy. But after months or years, you may realize you put automation in place. You solve some of the tough festering problems that you had to at the beginning, and they've moved to that left quadrant. They're now not taking as much work, but you're still charging the same. And like I said, clients eventually catch on, or maybe you point that out and you negotiate contracts and you move to the bottom. They becomes transactional, becomes a commodity. But then what happens is the client says, okay, we want more from you. Of course, we're not going to pay you more because we've already negotiated that price. And you don't want to lose the client. So they push you to the right. And all of a sudden, you're doing a bunch more work on these clients. And all of a sudden, they're not paying you any more money for it. And so in my experience, the best path forward is you're trying to keep them in the top. You sign them, you become a partner, you do really good work for them. Eventually, yes, you solve some of those problems and they start moving to the left, but through these client reviews, you recognize that. And you say, okay, we're not working on new, interesting, important, valuable problems for this client. What can we do to do that? You get alignment there and you move them back to that right quadrant. And you kind of do that cycle over and over again without dropping them down below. Here's a little bit, this wasn't exactly perfect, but this is a little bit of what our client profile looked like. I think I did this about a year ago when I did it. And then kind of give you how this actually looks when you scatter it out. And you can look at this and say, okay, those clients in that bottom right quadrant, which one of those are, and the joke's kind of, which one of those are strategic? I mean, you're losing money on them, but for some reason you're okay with that. And maybe because it's something you're not super experienced in, or a big brand or something like that you've decided to work on. But this just forces a conversation in those client reviews around, are we happy with how this looks? Are we happy with every specific client on where they fall on this? And if not, what are we going to do to move them to a different quadrant? And that forces, I find, the most productive part of that client portfolio review and gives you the real reason, or I guess starting point as you map out action plans for those clients. My last slide here is just books I've found helpful over time. So I read, I don't even know, a book or two a week. And these are some of the ones that I have found really valuable that I find myself referencing over and over and over again. They're kind of in order of importance. I won't read through them all, but Strategic Management of Professional Service Firms is a terrible title for a book. It's kind of an academically written book, but really interesting perspective on how to have distinction as an agency. Do you focus on your people, or do you focus on your process? Do you focus on solving unique problems, or do you focus on kind of standardized problems that you can use technology to solve? And then how brands grow, that I already mentioned. Really good perspective on how brands actually get market share, both for working with your clients, but also as you think about your agency. But all the books on here, ones that really helped me: Razor's Edge is just perspective. It's a fiction, but it's just perspective on what matters in life, if any of you haven't read it, and kind of what happens if you focus too much on getting rich and things like that. So anyway, great book. And that's it. As I mentioned earlier, we have our conference. Here's a little bit more about it. We just nested the conference website under our blog, PPC Hero. So if you go to ppchero.com, it's impossible to miss any of the conference links. It's called HeroConf. We're doing it in Austin in April, London in October, and if you want the agency growth workshop on top of the conference pass, I have prices there and everything like that. We honestly only have, we've actually oversold already the event for just the agency growth workshop, but we'll probably let one or two more in over time. And with that, it looks like Fred's put up a poll about this, and I will let him talk while I take a drink of water.
Yeah, sorry, Jeff, this was great content. And I think you may have had one more slide, but before people take off for the rest of their days, I wanted to make sure they had an easy way to get a follow-up on the stuff that you've been talking about. So that agency workshop, or if they want to hear more about Optmyzr, you can also check either of those boxes. I will follow up via email. But yeah, amazing stuff, Jeff. Thanks for sharing. We had a few questions come in, so let's take those. Steve was asking how you decide how many accounts a PPC account manager can handle before you decide to add more resources. And I guess when it comes to resources, maybe also talk a bit about how you think about adding more people versus adding more technology.
Sure. So we have this really complicated formula because we hire a lot of people who are new to the industry, and we spend a year training them before they ever become, client-facing account managers. So we have this like big spreadsheet that actually maps out 2 years where we think where our revenue is going to be, how many account managers we think we're going to need on that long end, which tells us how many, we call them production associates, we need to hire today. So our formula has become really complicated over time. However, in talking to a lot of other folks, and the number that lines up for us, typically it's about $18,000 a month in revenue, in account revenue, per person, per account manager on a team. As a kind of a general guideline, and if you look at that number, I've found that a lot of agencies kind of line up to that. And as far as when do you decide to add to that, our view has always been 25% ahead, and I don't know if it's always been, but for a long time it's been 25% ahead of need. So if we think we need 10 people, then we really want 12 or 13 on our team to be able to handle new business. Not everyone thinks that way. Some people say, you want to wait until the team's really stretched and filling it before you bring folks on, but that's one way we do it. And then as far as technology versus people, we've seen certainly, so we actually charge an independent tech fee most of the time, not always, but most of the time. And we do that because if we can, through that tech fee, find efficiencies in the account, that allows us to lower our service fee for the client because we don't have to make as much money on that side of things. So we kind of look at those two things, balance them out, make sure they work for those clients as part of the client lifecycle conversation, certainly part of the sales pitch.
Nice. And I guess that 25% additional staff is a little bit more challenging when you are a consultant and just starting out. Do you have any perspective on that? Like, say you are one person right now, like when should you think about adding additional people and actually going from being a consultant to becoming a small agency?
Yeah. So it's a great question. I struggle with it because I am a huge fan of cash. Agency's terrible business, one phone call away from clients leaving. And so how we measure generally our health of the company is how much cash we have in the bank. And we want enough cash in the bank that call our 3 largest accounts could walk away. And in the time our normal sales trajectory would take to be able to replace them, we have enough cash that we actually won't have to change any of our agency's plans. Which is pretty conservative, meaning that's a lot of cash for most folks. But if I was just an independent consultant, the way I would think of it is I would stock up my cash reserves in my business to the point that whatever business I'd be bringing in the extra help to work on, I would be able to, have a runway on their salary for long enough that I lost that account that was really driving my business at that point, to be able to replace them. So I'm not going to bed at night worrying, all right, I just hired this person. Am I, not going to be able to pay them in 3 months if something goes wrong? I value my sleep a lot, and I think that's why I like cash so much.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. That's a great way to think about it. Next question came from Paul. He was asking, how often do you review client accounts? And Paul, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, if it's like reviewing it together with the client, or if you're talking more about the internal review process, like the Friday afternoon meetings. So about reviewing it together with the client is the question.
Okay, so it's kind of a tough one. We have really big accounts. We have really small accounts. Big accounts, we do big quarterly reviews, usually in person, certainly at least over video, and that's a detailed review. But we do weekly calls, and most of our clients are kind of also experts in PPC, so they know to look in their account. They know how to ask good hard questions. So you're kind of reviewing it at that rate. Smaller accounts, we only have a monthly meeting with them. And then, we may do one of those kind of detailed reviews more like every 6 months.
Yeah, and I guess that it's a great question because it also goes to one of the points you were making. If you do a good job solving an issue, the client tends to be highly engaged. But in the days that I was doing consulting, I had this one client who would literally never talk to me for years, but he kept paying his bill, and I guess he was happy because he never talked to me. And so it's sort of that question, like, how do you engage with people who are happy so that there doesn't come one random day out of the blue, they show up, and the one time they talk to you, it's like to fire you. Right. And that's also why we think about just having reporting available through our tools at Optmyzr, because even if you're not having that conversation with the client, at least they're getting a periodic automated email from you with some stats and some metrics that basically prove you're doing great work for them and that there maybe isn't really a strong reason to talk on the phone. So I guess that's another angle on that.
Yep, that makes sense.
Okay. Another question, Jeff, came from Steve as well. So he's asking about agency pricing. So that's always a really interesting question. But do you charge percent of spend, flat fee? You said you charge a technology fee. Do you do a mix of all of those things?
Yeah, and I think pricing is something that's really tough, and I don't know that there's one solution. So I would say probably 70-80% of our clients are on some kind of mix of percent of spend and some kind of tech fee type situation. That's the bulk of how we do it. But we have some that are on fixed retainers, just kind of directionally based on the amount of work we think it's going to take. We have some that are on performance-based, revenue sharing type situations. So we try to be pretty flexible with it. But the honest answer is there's really no good way to do it. I don't think that, and I think if you try to just come up with, our agency is going to charge this exact way for every single client, you're going to immediately run into clients that don't fit that bill, and you're going to wonder if you should adjust. And we've decided over time to be somewhat flexible with the way we price, as long as we always feel like we're going to be able to provide the right value for a client based on, what they're willing to pay.
Yeah. Yeah, we see the same thing at Optmyzr, and I know we're not an agency, but it is really hard to have one set of pricing out there that's just going to work for everyone. So I think the best you can do is to have a baseline that's generally acceptable in the industry. From my experience, clients really like consistency of pricing, predictability, so knowing what they're going to pay. But then it does run into the issue that Jeff was talking about, which you now have established a price point. Now the client keeps asking for more and more. You're doing amazing work and growing that account, which makes it more challenging and just more work to keep managing that account. And so I think when you have a flat pricing, you just need to be ready to have a new conversation periodically, and maybe have flat pricing within tiers of spend. So it's not like 10% of every last dollar that you spend, but it's 10%, and that translates into a flat fee up until when you spend $500,000 a month. And then after that, maybe we move you on to the next tranche of pricing. So that's a model that I've seen that we somewhat use at Optmyzr, but I also see it used in agencies. And that is to balance how much work you have to put in versus how much you're getting paid.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And the only thing I would add to it is, so you mentioned that clients like predictability, and I think that on the average is totally true. But it is important to know, it goes back to knowing the client's business and how they think about it. We have one client that is they always show our fees included with all their plans. They'll do annual budgets, and there's a line in it for our fee, but they have a very complex offering. So we do a lot of different, I guess you would call them products for them that we're advertising, and each has its own budget, and they want to be able to allocate some portion of our fee to it. So they actually love percent of spend because they can just put in one flat number, and apply it to all those individual budgets and come up with a really accurate number on it. So it just comes back to that. I think for a lot of pricing is how do they think about their business? What do they value? Consistency or kind of ease to understand what they're going to be paying and what that looks like for them.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's actually one of the reasons we have a feature in Optmyzr where you can just put your percent of spend management fee as an agency, and then we automatically update all of the reports so that the cost per acquisition takes that management fee into account. And then what that client ends up getting is truly the real number, not just the AdWords spend, but also your management fee on top of that. But good. So we're coming to the top of the hour. So amazing presentation, Jeff. I've learned quite a few things that I'm going to take back to my business. So I hope it's been as useful for everyone else. Thank you all for spending some time with us. We will be sending out the video probably tomorrow, but definitely before the end of the week. So check your inbox for that. If you did want to follow up with Jeff, Jeff, I don't know if you have another slide. But I guess people can just go to ppchero.com/hero-conf. They can also get in touch with you about Hanapin right there. And if you have any questions about Optmyzr, my email is frederick@optmyzr.com, or I'm Silicon Valleys on Twitter. So happy to talk more to anyone who has follow-up questions. But thanks again, Jeff. Thanks again, everyone, for attending, and have a great rest of your week.